T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
It takes a shit scene.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
It takes a shit scene.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Steelers Titans reaction on deck. The Steelers get a really close win. Hard fought against the Tennessee Titans 20-16 on Sunday night, or Thursday night football, excuse me. Got some interesting thoughts and takeaways on the game. Also going to be giving my preview and predictions for the Dallas Cowboys taking on the Philadelphia Eagles, the Bengals, Bills, and we also got some college football things to discuss. Dabo Swinney went off on a fan, and I got a really interesting opinion about Tavon Austin and DeAnthony Thomas. Before we get into it, if you haven't already, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. We go live Monday through Thursday around 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And also, we go live after Monday and Thursday night football. Remember that we're not just a YouTube channel. Every episode of the JT Sports Podcast can be found on every podcasting platform: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon. Wherever you get your podcast from, the JT Sports Podcast is available. If you enjoyed tonight's episode and you want to support the podcast, give us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. We will greatly appreciate it. It helps the podcast out a lot. And if you want to help support further, you can share the podcast on your social media platforms with your friends, family members, and acquaintances. So let's get into it. The Steelers get a close win Thursday night over the Tennessee Titans, 20-6. The Tennessee Titans definitely have something special in Will Levis. I felt throughout the first 4 quarters and a couple minutes of this game, Will Levis was the better quarterback than Kenny Pickett. There were just certain throws that Will Levis was able to make that Kenny Pickett would never be able to make in his whole entire career. He had a couple of big third down throws in the tight windows. He was able to make throws with defenders all over him. And he was doing this behind a backup offensive line that was full of mostly second and third stringers. Meanwhile, when you look at Kenny Pickett, it wasn't a perfect game. He had a really good opening drive, and then after that, he was missing wide open throws. He had a crossing route to George Pickens earlier in this game on third down that he missed. But in typical Kenny Pickett fashion, he elevated his play in the fourth quarter when it mattered the most. And that's the thing that I have with Kenny Pickett. He doesn't light up the box score. But in the fourth quarter, if the Steelers need him to put them in position to win the game, he comes through more times than not. And he's a really scrappy player. And Matt Canada, we can all say that he called the best game of his whole entire Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator career. This was a really good game that he called on the offensive side of the football. And you got to give him a lot of credit for the way that this Steelers offense played with his play calling. Maybe he needs to be calling plays on the sidelines for the remainder of the season. The run game finally was able to get going. Both Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris had really good games. And when you look at the Steelers defense, of course, we know that this is going to be the key to the Steelers being able to have a successful season, because we know that you're not going to be able to expect too much from this offense. I mean, we're giving Matt Canada praise for the Steelers offense putting up 20 points. And we consider this to be one of the best games that he's ever called plays for. Meanwhile, this defense, though, they were able to get a big-time interception that pretty much sealed the game against the Tennessee Titans. The secondary is awful. The front seven is really good, but the Steelers drastically need to address the cornerback position in the offseason. Joey Porter Jr., he didn't have a great game. He had a good amount of penalties. He was getting worked by DeAndre Hopkins. Patrick Peterson, he was pretty solid, but outside of him, this Steelers secondary is god-awful. This may have been one of the worst secondaries that Mike Tomlin has put on the field in all his years being the head coach of the Steelers. The D-line, the linebackers, they're great. The secondary, not so much. And you can definitely tell that Micah Fitzpatrick was missed in this game. His impact definitely was felt when he was healthy, and hopefully he's able to come back sooner rather than later, because if the Steelers have to go the next month or so without Micah Fitzpatrick, I definitely think it could cost them a couple of games, because this secondary is definitely not going to be able to hold up without his presence in the back end of this defense. Overall, the Steelers improved to 5-3 on the season. They don't win pretty. Okay, the Steelers are one of those teams that they're going to be in a lot of tough games. They're going to be tightly contested. They're not the kind of ball club that's going to blow a team out. When you have a below average offense, you can't expect games to be all that pretty. Things are going to be ugly. And going against a really physical football team like the Tennessee Titans, who kind of have a similar style of play as you, we knew that this game probably was going to come down to, whoever got the ball last, whose defense was going to be able to get the big stop in the big moment. And the Steelers were able to do that. Like I said, Will Levis played a really good game. I felt like he was the best quarterback in this game for the first 4 quarters and midway through up the fourth quarter, until Kenny Pickett started to wake up. He hit Deontay Johnson on the sideline. Then he was able to hit Deontay Johnson in the end zone for a touchdown. And like I said earlier, Kenny Pickett, he doesn't really light up the box score. He's more so those quarterbacks that's able to elevate his play in the fourth quarter when the Steelers needed him to pull through and put them in position to succeed. So I don't really know how to properly evaluate a guy like Kenny Pickett. I've never seen a quarterback have this kind of style of play where he'll be garbage for the first couple of quarters, and then all of a sudden he looks all world in the fourth quarter. But Will Levis, to me, looked like the better quarterback for majority of this game up until the closing minutes of the fourth quarter. This is when we started to see Will Levis play like a rookie. He nearly threw an interception on one of the first plays during the final drive. And if it wasn't for that penalty by Joey Porter on DeAndre Hopkins, the Steelers would have had this game wrapped up even sooner. But I think that the future definitely is bright with Will Levis at the helm at quarterback for the Titans. You definitely do have your guy. This was somebody who was slated to be a top 10 pick, and he fell all the way to the second round during draft night. My biggest knock that I had on Will Levis is that when I watched him at Kentucky, he wasn't really great taking care of the football in late game situations, and you definitely saw that appear late in this game. But with what he had to work with on the offensive line and how well he played, he was able to get the ball to DeAndre Hopkins, something that Ryan Tannehill didn't know how the hell to do. Literally, like, the key to getting DeAndre Hopkins going is throwing him the freaking football. It's just simple as that. You see DeAndre Hopkins downfield, you say, fuck it. You just chuck it downfield and let him go to work. So Will Levis, he definitely looks more and more like the franchise quarterback of the Tennessee Titans every single game he plays in. And we've seen a small sample size out of Will Levis. But in the first two games that he started in for Tennessee, he's looked really poised. He's looked cool, calm, and collected under pressure. And you just hope that his decision-making can be slightly better late in games. I was really impressed with what I saw out of Will Levis tonight against a really good defense. Even though the secondary is cheeks, to be able to have this kind of composure against guys like TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, and Cam Hayward gives me a lot of confidence if I'm a Titans fan about Levis moving forward. And CJ Stroud had a really nice performance against the Steelers defense. Even though the Steelers secondary is not that great, for you to have this kind of performance against a defensive-minded coach and Mike Tomlin, and you're the rookie, definitely has to show that you have a potential, or you have potential in this league to be a really good quarterback, because this is a really good defense. Not just any quarterback can have success against the Steelers defensive front and Mike Tomlin. But overall, the Steelers, hard-fought win over the Tennessee Titans, 20-16. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section down below. This season for Clemson has been a major disappointment. I don't think Dabo Swinney or any Clemson fan expected this season to go the way that it has gone so far. They lost to NC State, Florida State. They also got blown out the first week of this season by Duke. And Dabo Swinney, he went off on the caller on his weekly radio show. The caller basically questioned his salary and also questioned, Clemson's performance on the field. And Dabo Swinney had some really strong rebuttals to this caller. I'm going to play a couple of minutes of this clip, and then I'm going to give my thoughts and reaction to it.
Hey, Tyler, I've listened to enough of you, Tyler. Listen, you can have all your opinions that you want, all right? I don't know how old you are. Don't really care, all right? But let me tell you something. We won 11 games last year. And you're part of the problem, to be honest with you, because that is part of the problem. It's people like you that all you do is the appreciation, the expectation is greater than the appreciation. And that's the problem. And so, we've won 12 10-plus win seasons in a row. That's happened 3 times in 150 years. So if you want to know why, Clemson ain't sniffed a national championship for 35 years. We've won 2 in 7 years. And there's only 2 other teams that can say that, Georgia and Alabama. Okay? Is this a bad year? Yeah. And it's my responsibility. Take 100% responsibility for it. And all this bull crap you're thinking, all these narratives you read, listen, man, you can have your opinion all you want. And you can apply for the job. And good luck to you. All right? But to answer your question, all right, we're second in draft picks. We've graduated 98% of our guys. We're second in wins. Right? If you want to know why, again, I'm telling you, we're not perfect. There's a lot of teams that, Frank Howard never had a bad year. Coach Ford never had a bad year. Coach K Never had a bad year in basketball? People have a bad year. But the part of the problem is the appreciation. I used to tell people all the time, and say, what's the difference in Clemson? I'm going to tell you. At some places there's an expectation, but at Clemson there's an appreciation. And what's happened at Clemson is we've won so much that even when it used to be the fun's in the winning, now even when you win, people like you complain and criticize the coaches and question everything. People like you, all right? When I hired Tony Elliott to be the offensive coordinator who never called a play in his life, I'm sure you were critical then. All right? And he took us to 2 national championships. People like you who just love to destroy people with your comments, all right? I'm sure you've never made any bad decisions. I'm sure you've lived a perfect life. I'm sure you've led a bunch of people. I'm sure you do your job. So to answer your question, I started as the lowest paid coach in this freaking business, all right? And I'm where I am because I've worked my ass off every single day. And I ain't going to let some smart-ass kid get on this phone and create this stuff. So if you got a problem with it, I don't care, all right?
Now, obviously, you can tell by listening to this conversation with Dabo Swinney and his response to the caller that he's really upset. And we know that Dabo Swinney is one of these coaches that he wears his heart on his sleeve. All right, he can come off as a crybaby, somebody that complains a little bit too much at times. And I kind of agree and disagree with his response to this. All right, obviously, when you're a fan of Clemson, you have really high expectations, just like how Ohio State fans have high expectations. And even when they win, there are still Buckeye fans that are heavily critical about Ryan Day. And there are Ohio State fans that are going to criticize every single thing that goes wrong with Ohio State, even when they win. And when they lose, Ryan Day's going to get a lot of criticism. But part of being a head coach is being able to take this criticism on the chin and not letting it get you too emotional. Dabo Swinney got really emotional in this. And there's a saying that goes, if you're a head coach, don't listen to the fans or you'll end up sitting in the stands with them. Dabo Swinney, I think that he's somebody who pays way too much attention and gets way too riled up about what fans say. This has obviously been a really disappointing season for Clemson. This has pretty much been a disaster. You lose to Duke, NC State, that's never acceptable. And I get where he's coming from with the appreciation part. You know, Clemson fans should be appreciative of all the great years they've had and all the national championships. But at the same time, the level of expectation for Clemson should never go down. This fan base is used to competing for national championships, competing for a spot in the college football playoffs. They're not used to being 4-4 and not being in the conversation to make it to the ACC championship game. And although Dabo Swinney did take a little bit of accountability, he still is kind of not taking full accountability when he's trying to blame this on the fans, saying, you're part of the problem. No, the fans are not part of the problem. The fans are never part of the problem. The fans have nothing to do with the terrible play calling that we saw when DJ Uiagalelei was at the helm at quarterback. They tried to say that DJ Uiagalelei was the problem. He transfers to Oregon State. And meanwhile, Cade Klubnik is still having similar issues that DJ Uiagalelei had. The offensive line is still not great. You still don't have game-breaking talent at wide receiver. And you're not utilizing the transfer portal. There's a reason why Clemson is where they are right now, 4-4 prior to playing Notre Dame. And they potentially could go 4-5, and there's a very strong chance they don't make it to a bowl game this year. Even though I'm pretty sure they'll be able to get the 6 wins. But Dabo Swinney, just trying to say the fans are the problem, just is a bullshit excuse to me. Don't blame the fans for being part of the problem. The fans aren't part of the problem or the solution. Fans are spectators. They have the right to have their opinion. And yeah, the caller may have gotten a little bit smart, and Dabo Swinney He has the right to respond in any way he feels fit, but this came off as a little bit overly emotional, and it sounded like Dabo Swinney was a crybaby. He basically was telling the fans basically to shut the F up and just enjoy the national championships that we've won in the past. And I get Dabo Swinney's frustration, but as a head coach, you have to go about handling these things better than what you do. Dabo Swinney lets the media get the best of him way too often. Like Ryan Day gets criticized nearly every single day. There's people who want Ryan Day fired despite the fact that he hasn't lost, more than 10 games? He's been to several college football playoff appearances, a national championship, and all because he's been, losing 2 straight to Michigan. Fans think that his job should be on the line. And yeah, you don't see Ryan Day blaming fans for being part of the problem. At the end of the day, if it wasn't for the fans, you wouldn't be getting paid the lucrative salary that you're getting right now. Clemson wouldn't be bringing in all this revenue. The fans aren't part of the problem, and they aren't part of the solution. The fans are the reason why you're getting paid what you get paid, and they're the reason why you exist, Dabo Swinney. I think that you're a little bit underappreciative of the fans in a sense. And yes, the fans have a right to criticize you. Now, could he have gone a little bit more respectful with his comments to you? Of course he could have. But as a head coach, you have to be able to take this kind of criticism. And Dabo Swinney, he's just way too thin-skinned for me. And I like Dabo Swinney. He's one of my favorite coaches in all of college football. You talk about somebody who can get players ready to go in big games. Dabo Swinney is an ultimate motivator. But to act like the fans are part of the problem is just a cop-out to me. How about you hit the transfer portal and do what Florida State did, which is why they were able to beat you. Keon Coleman, Jaheim Bell, Jordan Travis all had a really good game against you when they beat you a couple of weeks ago. And where did those guys come from? They came from the transfer portal. Look, I get that Dabo Swinney runs his program the best way he sees fit. But you also have to understand that it seems like the game is starting to pass him by, and he's starting to get a little bit too stubborn and a little bit too caught up in his way, and he's starting to overlook, and he's not being able to adapt to the current state of college football, and his stubbornness is costing Clemson, and these fans are letting him know that. And for Dabo Swinney to have this response kind of comes off as a little bit insecure to me. I mean, we get it that you're the most successful coach in Clemson's history. And nobody's knocking you for that. And this caller wasn't knocking you for your previous success. He's knocking you for the failure of a season that you have in front of you right now. You're not supposed to be 4-4. Fans shouldn't be appreciative of losing to NC State, Florida State, and fucking Duke. You are a blue blood football program. There's no reason why you should ever lose to Duke and be okay with it and try to make it seem like the fans are part of the problem. No, Dabo Swinney, how about you make the necessary changes needed to get Clemson back to the top? You see, expectations are never supposed to diminish. The expectations are supposed to remain the same. And when you're on the top of the college football food chain, of course, fans are always going to expect to compete for titles year in and year out. That's just the expectations that have come with the success that Clemson has had over the years. You don't have the luxury of fans being okay with 8-9 win seasons anymore, Dabo, because you built this program up to such a point where anything other than being in the college football playoffs is viewed as a disappointment. And yes, you are going to have a couple of down years, but Clemson has had a few down years. You look at Alabama, they aren't down for too long. They don't go too long without being in a national championship conversation. Clemson isn't even going to be able to win the ACC this year, and it's a massive disappointment. And I think that Dabo Swinney, the pressure and the disappointment of this season is definitely getting to him. And I've seen him have too many instances this year when he's snapping on reporters, he's snapping and going off on tirades on callers on his weekly radio show, Like, I think if you're Dabo Swinney, maybe you need to relax a little bit, take a little bit of a break from maybe this call-in show that you do on a weekly basis and try to gather yourself and have some composure, because it seems like he's starting to look way too insecure. This is the sign of a head coach that right now he's feeling a lot of pressure from not just the fan base, but also within the program a little bit. And although he's not going to get fired because of this, there are going to be some things that Dabo Swinney is going to have to look in the mirror, and he's going to have to change about himself and how he runs this operation. That's what makes Nick Saban the greatest coach in college football history. What makes Nick Saban such a great coach is the fact that he's always been able to adapt. It's never taken him long, or it never has taken him long to get with the current state of the college football landscape. When everybody was running a no-huddle spread offense, guess what Nick Saban started doing? The spread no-huddle offense. When everybody started having these great quarterbacks that could run around and extend plays like Johnny Manziel and Deshaun Watson, guess what Nick Saban went out and did? He got Jalen Hurts. He got Bryce Young. He got Tua Tagovailoa. Nick Saban has always been a great coach because he's always been able to have a feel for when he needs to adapt and switch things up. He's not running the same program at Alabama in 2023 that he was when he first arrived in Tuscaloosa in 2007. Dabo Swinney has been hesitant to change. As a head coach, you can't be stubborn. You got to be able to do what's best, even if you don't agree with it all the time, if it gives your team the best chance to win. And I think Dabo Swinney going off on this caller just shows that, the season going the way that it has is starting to show just how thin-skinned he is. And everybody has always viewed him as a crybaby. And I have always been somebody who's kind of pushed back on that narrative, because I love the fact that Dabo Swinney gets emotional about this. But at the same time, letting a fan get you this riled up just shows that you're just insecure. And it also shows the fact that, you're somebody who doesn't really do a good job at handling criticism. Anytime you criticize Dabo Swinney, he comes at you. He can never take it on the chin. So those are just my thoughts on Dabo Swinney's tirade on the fan on his call-in show. I'm pretty sure a good amount of you guys are probably going to disagree with what I said. Some of you guys are going to agree, but I just think that Dabo Swinney went about this the wrong way. You got to keep your composure. Like, he just went loose. You can never let a fan get you this riled up, especially when you know that the season's going the wrong way. It's not going the way that you wanted it to, but at the end of the day, that's just part of the job. I mean, trying to make it seem like the fans are the problem is just a cop-out and it's a bullshit excuse. No, Dabo Swinney, the fans are not part of the problem. The fans pay money to come to these games. They buy merchandise. They're a large reason why you're getting paid that big salary. They have a right to be upset when they feel like expectations aren't being met. And you as a head coach need to do what's in the best interest of your program and trying to get Clemson back to that championship level. Don't tell fans to bathe in past success. Nobody cares about the past. People care about the present and the future. And the present and the future of Clemson football, people think is on the decline. We got the Dallas Cowboys taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. This is the game that a lot of us have been waiting all season for. Philadelphia right now, they got the best record in the NFC. They only got one loss. But for some reason, though, it seems like this Eagles team isn't as dominant this season as they were last year. Their defense isn't playing as good as what it was during 2022. Jalen Hurts has been a little bit turnover prone. The offense has been kind of inconsistent at times. And then you got the Dallas Cowboys, right? And the last time we saw Dallas in a big primetime matchup against a good team, they got ran out of the stadium by the San Francisco 49ers. They got their ass kicked 42-10. It was a no contest. And this is a big prove-it game for Mike McCarthy because he's viewed as one of those head coaches that can't get you over the top. He's not going to be able to win you a lot of big games. And the same narrative that people have about Mike McCarthy, ironically, they have about Dak Prescott. He's good enough to get you to the postseason. He's good enough to get you wins against average, below average teams, but in big games, he doesn't play his best football. Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott, with the win over the Philadelphia Eagles, have a chance to shift the narrative about them. This is an Eagles team that their best win up to this point this season, in my opinion, was against the Miami Dolphins when they beat them 31-17. The Cowboys have just as talented as a roster as the Philadelphia Eagles do. So for Dallas, them losing this game kind of is unacceptable. If you're a Dallas Cowboy fan, you expect to win this game. You expect to compete. You don't expect to get blown out like how you did against the 49ers. And I still feel like the Dallas Cowboys are a legitimate Super Bowl contender. A good amount of people don't feel the same way. So this is a big game for the Dallas Cowboys in determining if they are the team that many people thought they would be prior to this season. If you can't beat Philadelphia, then how can I have faith that you're going to be able to make a deep playoff run? Now, for Jalen Hurts, his inability to take better care of the football, I definitely think is something that you got to look out for against a really great defense that's outstanding at forcing takeaways. And I'm really excited to see the matchup between A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith against Deron Bland and Stephon Gilmore. Like, Deron Bland has been the breakout player of the year on defense for the Dallas Cowboys. Trayvon Diggs goes down and Deron Bland comes up, and he's just as good as what Trayvon Diggs has been. Meanwhile, you got A.J. Brown, who is making a legitimate case to be in the MVP conversation. I mean, this dude has had 100 yards plus receiving in nearly every game other than the first 2 weeks of this season. And I'm really interested in seeing how he's going to fare against a really stout cornerback position. Now, you look at the last time the Dallas Cowboys faced off against a team as good as the Philadelphia Eagles, you got blown out by the 49ers. What went wrong in that game? Well, Dak Prescott wasn't great. I don't think that the play calling was all that good, and nothing seemed to work. And against the Philadelphia Eagles, you know, this defense, with the fact that it's been really inconsistent at times, Sam Howell had a really big performance against this Eagles defense. I think if you're Dak Prescott, you got the opportunity to have a really big game. And if you can't have a big ball game and you get outplayed by Jalen Hurts, I definitely think that the narrative that Dak Prescott isn't the guy that can get you over the top is going to be proven more true. And I know Dallas Cowboy fans get heavily defensive over Dak Prescott. A good amount of the fan base feels like Dak Prescott can win them a Super Bowl, but there's a other amount of the fan base that feels Dak Prescott's holding this team back. Imagine if Dak Prescott has one of those games where he's just turning the football over, not making good decisions, forcing the issue, and he gets outplayed by Jalen. You see, the difference between Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott is that Jalen Hurts can make mistakes and overcome them just because he's just so talented. Meanwhile, Dak Prescott, he makes mistakes and they prove to be costly. He's not able to overcome them. For the people that think that Dak Prescott is an elite quarterback, we're going to just see how true that is, depending on how he plays against Jalen Hurts and this Eagles defense. They got a really good offensive line, but for some reason, anytime they get in the red zone, they struggle. The good thing about the Cowboys' red zone struggles is that you're going up against a defense that also has had their fair share of struggles inside the red zone as well. The run game has been decent at times, even though it can be better. You really need to find a way to play a complementary style of football. You can't find yourself in a situation where you got to ask Dak Prescott to win you this game, because I don't really think that Dak Prescott's capable of being able to carry the Dallas Cowboys to the win over the Philadelphia Eagles, even though he should be able to. Because if Sam Howell can light up the Philadelphia Eagles secondary, why can't Dak Prescott? The Dallas Cowboys, they got a lot to prove in this game. And we're about to find out just what this Dallas Cowboys team is underneath on the interior. Because on the exterior, you look at Dallas from a talent standpoint, you say this is one of the most talented teams in the National Football League. Same thing with the Philadelphia Eagles. But the Philadelphia Eagles, they only got one loss. And yet people make it seem like they aren't playing their best football. Where truthfully, the Philadelphia Eagles, this team just isn't the same team that they had last year. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for the Dallas Cowboys, there seems to be a consistent theme with this team being unable to win big games when they matter. If Dallas wants to remain in contention for that first seed in the NFC, this is a must-win game, and also for a chance to win this division. Because I think there's a great chance that Philadelphia wins this thing back-to-back years consecutively. Because the Dallas Cowboys are just one of those teams that they don't play their best football in big games. And that's why I got to go with the Philadelphia Eagles to win this game. I don't think the Cowboys are going to change the narrative about them. They got a great defense. Their defense definitely should be able to keep them in this game, but I don't really trust Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy's play calling, I don't really think it's been any better than the play calling that they've gotten out of Kellen Moore, and this offense has kind of looked worse. Yes, they are still having the same amount of points scored and total yardage put up that they were under Kellen Moore, but they've been worse in the red zone. And Dak Prescott, against the 49ers, he looked awful. Is he going to look better against the Philadelphia Eagles? I don't know. I don't have a lot of confidence that he's going to look all that great. And I definitely believe that Jalen Hurts is going to prove why he's the far more better quarterback than Dak Prescott. Cowboy fans were quick to point out when Jalen Hurts had a couple of bad games. But what they don't fail to realize is that, Dak Prescott and Jalen Hurts can overcome turnovers. Dak Prescott, he has a couple of turnovers and they lose. I like Dallas to beat Philly. But at the same time, I get why people have a lot of confidence that the Cowboys can pull off a win because they just are so talented. They got so many great players on the defense side of the football, and people believe that Philly is kind of a little bit fraudulent. But I don't view the Eagles as a fraud. I just view them as a team that's different this season from what they were last year. And there's nothing wrong with that. And they got one of the most talented rosters in the league and one of the best QBs in the game right now. And with that, they're going to be able to overcome maybe not being able to play their best football. Dallas, on the other hand, if they don't play their best football and Dak Prescott can't take care of the pigskin, I don't think that they're going to be able to win this game. I think that the Dallas Cowboys need to win the turnover battle. They also have to be able to run the football effectively, and they got to play complementary football. And I don't think they're going to be able to get great play calling out of Mike McCarthy, and I think in big spots in this game, we're going to see why Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy have the narratives that people throw out about them and why they mostly are proven true more times than not. This is a big prove-it game for the Dallas Cowboys. If Cowboy fans want to be taken seriously as contenders, they need to win this game. This fan base, before this season, they felt like this was their best shot at being able to win a Super Bowl. Well, so far they haven't proven that. Smacked in Sunday night against the 49ers, and if they lose this game against Philadelphia, I think they're going to further prove more why this team just isn't able to get the big trophy or why they're not able to get over the top. This is the game where Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy have to prove themselves, because if not, I think it's going to be a foreshadowing of what's going to happen in the postseason. This is pretty much a playoff game. It's going to have a playoff atmosphere. You got a lot at stake. You're trying to stay in the race to have the number one seed, and you also are trying to stay in competition to win this division. And if Philadelphia wins this game, then they're going to have a multiple game lead on you, and they most likely would win this division. So with a loss here, I think that the NFC East will pretty much be all but decided. The Giants are terrible. The Commanders aren't great. If Dallas loses this game, I think that it's pretty safe to say that they aren't contenders for the Super Bowl, because you got to be able to win big games during the regular season, and they will be 0-2 against teams with winning records this year. Like, it's cool to blow out the New York Giants. That's cool. All right, you should be blowing out the New York Giants. You should be the team like the Los Angeles Chargers. But what can you do against the other top competition in your conference? You have just as good as a roster as the Philadelphia Eagles. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to win this game, and there's no reason why this should be a one-sided affair. But I just trust Philadelphia more. I have more reasons to trust Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts because this season they've proven to be able to beat good teams. They beat the Miami Dolphins by multiple possessions. But I look at Dallas, and I look at the fact that you struggled against Arizona, and yeah, you look good against sorry teams, but against best competition that you play, you don't really look so hot. And that just seems to be the overarching theme when it comes to watching the Dallas Cowboys play. Give me the Philadelphia Eagles. 31-20 is my final score prediction for this game. We got the Bills taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. Sunday Night Football. This is the game of the week. The last time we saw these two teams play, the Cincinnati Bengals dominated the Buffalo Bills in the divisional round 27-10 in last year's playoffs. The Bengals, the reason why they were able to dominate the Bills was because they were the better, more balanced team in their last outing. All right? They were able not to just have success throwing the football, but Joe Mixon had a big day on the ground, and the defense played excellent. Meanwhile, Buffalo, they were too overly reliant on Josh Allen. He didn't have a great game. He had the turnovers that kind of were costly, and they couldn't run the football at all, and the defense didn't show up to play in that game. This year, though, Buffalo's defense has been arguably top 3, top 5 in the game. And they have a really good pass rush. This is one of the most underrated defensive lines in all of the entire National Football League. Like, nobody talks about how good the Bills' defensive line has been this season. And when you look at the Cincinnati Bengals coming into this game, this is an offensive line that still isn't playing up to the level of talent that they have on that unit. When Cincinnati signed Orlando Brown in free agency at left tackle, many people felt like that was finally the missing piece to solving the Bengals' long-term problems on the offensive line. But this offensive line still hasn't played all that good. Now, last week, they looked really good. They had a big win. Well, the last time I watched the Bengals play, they beat the Seattle Seahawks, right? And they currently are riding on a 3-game winning streak. And ever since Joe Burrow came back fully healthy, he's looked like an entirely different quarterback from the quarterback that we saw the first couple of weeks this season. And when they beat San Francisco last week, this dude was looking like kind of like the white version of Lamar Jackson. I did not know Joe Burrow had this kind of mobility. He was breaking out of sacks from Nick Bosa and Arik Armstead. He just was looking like a man possessed. He completed his first 19 passes against San Francisco. The Buffalo Bills defense, they struggled to have success slowing down this passing attack. And if Joe Burrow comes into this game and he picks up from where he left off against the 49ers, it's going to be really disappointing if you're Sean McDermott. Because the big problem with Sean McDermott and the Buffalo Bills being unable to get over the hump in the postseason is that this defense never shows up in the playoffs anytime they lose. And if you can't slow down this Bengals offense, an offense that has struggled for pretty much the majority of this season, last week was their best performance offensively all year long against a really good 49ers defense. The Bills, yes, they do have some injuries that they're dealing with in the secondary and on, the front seven, but that's no excuse. Everybody's dealing with injuries. Nobody's fully healthy around the midway point of the NFL season. Either teams are missing star players or star players are playing through pretty nagging injuries. And if the Buffalo Bills defense gets carved up by Joe Burrow once again, I think that people are going to have the pitchforks ready for Sean McDermott. And I'm looking at this game as a playoff game in a sense, even though it's in the regular season. The reason why is because there's a lot at stake. Buffalo right now is behind the Miami Dolphins in the AFC East. They'll drop to 5-4, and they'll even be further back in contention to have the number 1 seed. Meanwhile, Cincinnati, they need to win this game because they still are trying to stay afloat in the AFC North. And with the loss here, the Ravens could potentially run away with this thing, and the Browns still are in the thick of things. Cincinnati needs to win this game, and the Buffalo Bills, they need to win this game also, which is why, to me, this is a playoff kind of game. All right, and you don't really get these this often in the midway point of the season, but this is going to have a playoff feel to it. And it always feels that way anytime you have two of the NFL's best quarterbacks squaring off. And it's fair to say that Joe Burrow has gotten the better of Josh Allen, especially when you look at how the last game went. You see, Buffalo this year, they've been really good at being able to stay balanced. All right, James Cook has been really good on the ground. This offensive line has been slightly improved. It's all really going to come down to if Josh Allen can take care of the football, because his recklessness is what gets the Buffalo Bills in trouble. And it's odd because he plays really good from behind, but anytime the Bills get a lead, he just throws it away. It's so weird to me. Normally, you see quarterbacks who play bad from behind, or you see quarterbacks that play bad coming from behind, but they play great with a lead. And the reason why it's been that way is because Buffalo has been unable to have success running the football. You should be able to have success running the football on this Cincinnati front. James Cook, he's really good getting the ball in the open field. He's very fast. He also has very good hands catching out of the backfield. I think that he's the big X factor for Buffalo in this game. You got Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, who've had some really good performances this year. You also got a rookie tight end in Dalton Kincaid, who is coming off a really big-time performance last week. And let's not forget that the Buffalo Bills, even though they do have some head-scratching losses, like when they lost to the New England Patriots a couple of weeks ago, they still got some really big wins. Like, they destroyed the Miami Dolphins. They put nearly 50 points on the Miami Dolphins, and the Miami Dolphins are a really good team. The Buffalo Bills, they've shown the ability to get up for big games. It's just that anytime they're able to go up against a team like the Cincinnati Bengals that can play truly complementary style football, they don't really do a good job at trying to play complementary football in their own right. And if they can't run the football in this game and they have to overly rely on Josh Allen, not just to carry them with his arm, but with his legs also, they're going to get in the same situation that they were in the divisional round when they lost this game 27-10. You got to be able to take some of the load off of Josh Allen. Joe Burrow, even with how great he is, Cincinnati has Joe Mixon, and Joe Mixon had a really good performance against the San Francisco 49ers. There were some Bills players that say that they felt like they lost that playoff game to Cincinnati because of the snow. Well, it's time to prove it. You know, you're going on the road, hostile environment. You're a 2-point underdog, which this game pretty much is a pick 'em at this point. Prime time. You got the opportunity to prove that last year's loss was a fluke, and you got the opportunity to show that you're still one of the best teams in the NFL, because I believe that both of these two teams are kind of being overlooked in the Super Bowl conversation. Everybody still has their eyes on the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs and the Jacksonville Jaguars, but with whoever wins this game, you definitely put yourself right back into the mix. And the loser of this game, you know, things look a little bit more bleaker for you. Now, whoever loses this game is still most likely going to make it to the playoffs. Not saying that, but I think that this is a big game in determining who is actually able to be a legitimate contender in the AFC this year. The Bengals, they could be 5-3 and find themselves right back into the thick of things. Meanwhile, if they lose, you know, they potentially still could be in last place in the AFC North, even with the Browns not having Deshaun Watson fully healthy. Buffalo, on the other hand, 6-3 puts you right back into that conversation to have the number 1 seed. But if you drop the 5-4, I think it'll be a major letdown at this point, because then things get a little bit tougher for you. And I think a big reason why Buffalo has struggled in the postseason is because, unlike Mahomes, they aren't able to get that number 1 seed. If you can get that number 1 seed this year, that would make things a lot easier for you in terms of you being able to make a deep run in the playoffs. This is a playoff game, similar to that Dallas Cowboys and Philadelphia Eagles matchup that we just talked about. You know, there are big implications in this game. And I think that we're going to find truly what these teams are with whoever is able to come up on the winning end of things. And if Buffalo can't beat Joe Burrow and company again, what does that say about Sean McDermott? What does that say about Josh Allen? The fact that you got a super talented team, but you just can't find a way to get it done against a team that has been to 2 consecutive AFC championships. And it's going to make me ask the question, what's the difference between why the Cincinnati Bengals are so much more successful than what the Buffalo Bills are when they kind of have similar teams? Buffalo's roster is just as good as the Cincinnati Bengals. Even if the Bengals may have a better offensive line talent-wise, they haven't played like it all the time. And the Bengals right now are a team that's starting to get really hot. And this is normally the time of the year where the Bengals start to peak and play their best football. And if you're the Buffalo Bills, you can't beat Cincinnati. It becomes a little bit tougher for me to view you as a team that can make it out of the AFC. Regardless of how I feel about you, if you can't get it done in the regular season against Cincinnati and, we still think about what happened to you in the playoffs last year, what makes us think that the results are going to be any different? And it makes me start looking at Sean McDermott. If this defense gets carved up by Joe Burrow and company once again, I'm going to be looking at him and saying, dude, you're supposed to be a defensive-minded coach. Why are you struggling to slow down Joe Burrow? We get that Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But if you're a defensive-minded coach and your defense is the reason why you're coming up short in the playoffs, then something has to give. I think that this is a really big test for both of these two teams in determining just where these teams rank in the Super Bowl conversation. I think the winner of this game, you definitely feel way more confident about their chances being able to make it out of the AFC versus the team that loses, because the team that loses, they're going to kind of be a little bit behind in the race for number one in the AFC when it comes to playoff seeding, especially the Bengals, because they're in a dogfight right now. The Browns are good. The Ravens are good. The Steelers are good. I mean, every game for Cincinnati is a must-win. Buffalo has a little bit more leeway because the Jets, they're kind of a middling team right now. They're not really that great offensively. They're just getting carried by their defense. Zach Wilson is just good enough to keep them in positions to win. But ultimately, with the way that the AFC East has turned out, Buffalo, regardless if you lose this game, you may not be viewed in the Super Bowl conversation. But if Cincinnati loses, they may not make it to the postseason because there may not be a spot for all four teams in the AFC North to get into the playoffs. And even though they are on a 3-game win streak, I mean, the AFC North, everybody's neck and neck. And right now, they're battling to try to get out of last place in this division over the Cleveland Browns. So this is a really big game for both of these teams. But if you ask me which team needs to win this game a little bit more, I got to go with the Cincinnati Bengals. And I'm taking the Bengals to get the win. I just think that the Bengals just have the Buffalo Bills number. I think that for some reason, Sean McDermott, his defense just doesn't have any answers for Joe Burrow. And looking at the way Joe Burrow played last week against San Francisco and the way Jamar Chase has played and the fact that Buffalo's banked up defensively, I think that this Bengals offense continues to pick up from where they left off against the 49ers, and they ultimately are the reason why they win this game. Although I do think that this defense isn't going to play all that great, I do think that the Bills offense is going to have a way better performance in this game than what they did the last time they went up against this Bengals defense. But I'm ultimately am going with the Bengals to win, 31-27 being the final score. When I was first introduced into college football, I was a big fan of Tavon Austin and DeAnthony Thomas. And I remember back in elementary school at lunch, we used to have some really heated debates about who was better, Tavon Austin and DeAnthony Thomas. Like, those Tavon and DeAnthony Thomas debates used to go crazy. And these were two of the most electrifying players in college football during the 2010s. And when both of these guys came into the NFL, there was a lot of hype behind these two players, right? And ultimately, neither one was able to have the same amount of success in the National Football League that they had on the collegiate level. And I feel like the reason why neither one of these players worked out isn't because they weren't talented enough. I just think that the NFL wasn't really ready for players like Tavon Austin and DeAnthony Thomas that had their kind of skill sets, because both of these dudes are really undersized. Tavon is 5'8", 174 pounds when he came out, and similar to DeAnthony Thomas only had an inch in height over him at 5'9", 174 pounds. And another thing is that they more were positionless players than they were being true wide receivers or being true running backs. They were players that you had to move around the offense. And I don't think that during the time when they came into the NFL, there was the same amount of creativity then than there is right now. Imagine if Tavon Austin got drafted in last year's NFL draft by the Miami Dolphins, and he had an offensive mind like Mike McDaniel, who was able to find ways to get the most out of Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill because all the motion that he utilizes in his offense, the fact that Mike McDaniels does such a great job at getting Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in space. That's something that I don't think Tavon Austin really had the luxury of having, even though he did have Sean McVay as his head coach at one point when he got hired by the Rams. It's just Sean McVay didn't really know how to work with a player that had Tavon Austin's skill set. And Andy Reid was coaching DeAnthony Thomas in Kansas City at one point, but even he didn't really know how to use a guy like DeAnthony Thomas. You see, these guys were great in space. They were players that you had to get involved using motion, bubble screens, sweeps, slants. Despite the fact that they had game-changing speed, they weren't phenomenal deep threats. They weren't really great catching the ball in the middle with defenses laying down big hits on them. They were guys that you had to get involved on the perimeter. They were limited to either being in the slot or being more seen as a gadget running back. And there just wasn't a lot of creativity in the NFL at that time when it came to finding out ways to use undersized players like Tavon Austin and DeAnthony Thomas. I think that in the year 2023 now, the league is more suited for players that have the kind of skill sets that Tavon and DeAnthony Thomas had. It's just that back then, the NFL just wasn't ready for them. And I think in the current state that the game is in right now, it's moving more towards of having smaller players that are undersized but really shifty in the open field. Look at, Tank Dell, for example, and Zay Flowers. Neither one of those guys are physically imposing. Tank Dell's 5'8", and Zay Flowers is 5'9". But despite that, they're really good with the respective teams because they know how to get open. They're fantastic route runners. Tavon Austin and DeAnthony Thomas weren't really great route runners. You kind of had to manufacture ways for them to get open in a sense, and that's a big reason why they weren't all that effective at the NFL level. If you put Tavon Austin or DeAnthony Thomas when they first came out in the offense that the Dolphins run, I think they have way more success than what they did early on in their careers when they first got drafted. It's just that the game has changed so much, and there's just so much more creativity on the offense now that it will vote well for guys like Tavon and DeAnthony Thomas. And I just think that, they came into the NFL at a time where the game didn't know how to use players that had this skill set. And I feel like they were before their time. Now, there's other reasons why they weren't really that great. Tavon Austin was more of a gadget player. He was able to make the most out of his collegiate career when he was a two-time All-American because he was just so elusive, and he also had game-breaking speed. But once you get to the NFL, you got to be able to get open. And Tavon Austin wasn't really great at separating. He didn't run the greatest routes. And he also wasn't really a great deep threat that had reliable hands. Meanwhile, you look at DeAnthony Thomas, he was more just so a special teams player who maybe at times he could give you a spark on offense. But I don't even think Andy Reid was all that great finding out ways to get DeAnthony Thomas involved. So it's not like these players didn't have the skill set to be as good in the NFL as they were in college. In my opinion, I just think that the league at that time when they came in just didn't know how to utilize these guys with the special skill sets that they had compared to the current present date in the NFL. If Tavon Austin and DeAnthony Thomas came out of the last two drafts, I feel like they would have had way more success because the NFL is more geared towards smaller players that have this skill set than what it was a decade ago in 2013 and 2014. So you guys let me know how you guys feel about Tavon Austin, DeAnthony Thomas, and give your reasons for why you feel they didn't work in the league. And do you agree with my take? Do you feel like these two guys were drafted before their time? Do you feel like the NFL didn't know how to utilize their skill sets back when they first were introduced into the league? Because I feel like in the year 2023, you put either one of these guys coming out on a Mike McDaniel's offense or a Kyle Shanahan offense, and they will go to work. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you check out the JT Sports Podcast, available on all podcasting platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Leave us with a 5-star review. Share the podcast with your friends, family members, and acquaintances. And I will see you guys